This is EBS Radio.
This is E.B. Smith with Facts Matter. Today I want to bring you another episode, another dive into where we stand in Black America, where we truly stand in Black America. I think there's a misconception that we have already arrived, or all the things that have been done against us or prevent us from being successful has already been told. I don't think that's true. I think there's so much to be told. So and if we don't know the truth, we can't fix it. Well, my guest today is going to be somebody that will shed a lot of truth on us and what we saw and what affected us. His name is James Robenalt, and he is an author of a book, Ballots and Bullets. What an awesome book that talks about the Black power in politics and urban guerrilla warfare in 1968 Cleveland. He's here today to talk about a new project he's working on. Welcome, James. Welcome to the show.
Hi, EB. Nice to be here.
First of all, let's bring people up to date on the book, Ballots and Bullets. Maybe bring up some of the highlights for those people who haven't read it. I really want to entice people to read it. What would you say some of the highlights of the book? Maybe some things that people don't know about.
Yeah, well, the book is about the shootout in Glenville in 1968 between Ahmed Evans and his group and Cleveland police. It was in the summer of 68. It was right after the year that Dr. King was killed, and then Bobby Kennedy was killed in June. So this is, like in July 23rd is the anniversary of it. And I found out about this because one of the secretaries in my law firm, her father was a policeman who was shot and wounded in that battle. And so she told me about it. I looked it up, and this was in 2016 when I first looked it up. And when I did, what I found was Ahmed Evans shooting police and having a war in the streets over repression and other things. And in 2016, I was watching as all these murders were happening on video. And a Black Panther went to Dallas and purposely to shoot white policemen and killed 5 of them in this attack. And so I was watching that, and I just thought to myself, why are we still here 50 years later? That was what led me to write this book. Why had things stalled back in 1968? It seemed like we were going in the right path. And 50 years later, here we are with these same problems and these same conditions. So it caused me to reach out and try to learn about, what had happened, how that had happened, why it had happened. And it ended up being, in large part, the story of Carl Stokes, the first African-American mayor of a major U.S. city. But it was also about the Black nationalist movement. And fortunately for me, I reached out through various people to Mutawaf Shahid, an imam here in town, and he gladly met with me and opened up to me and told me a lot of stuff about what was going on back at the time. So he was a big influence on this book, and I actually co-dedicated the book to him, along with a police lieutenant from back at the time who also helped me out. So it's a wide-ranging story about the Black freedom struggle as it came through Cleveland, Ohio. And we were really ground zero, 1965 to 68. This is where it was happening. And I found out that Malcolm X came here and gave his Ballots and Bullets speech at Corey Methodist Church in 1964, a year after Dr. King had come here after Birmingham to raise bail money for all the people being put in jail in Birmingham, speaking at the same place, Corey Methodist Church. So it's an extraordinary time, extraordinary story, and frankly, it's been all but lost to history, and I think it needs to be resurrected.
You said after analyzing everything that was going on, you made a statement about why are we still here? I believe that we are still here. I believe we're still here. I believe that what we're seeing now is just another form of it, and those who are not wise enough or have enough history have noticed it, right? They think it's all gone away because now things are happening behind the scenes. So I really want you to segue into the next project. Talk about how you answered that question in the book, and Ballots and Bullets,
Radio.
and how you continue to answer that question in the next book, and why the information in the next book is important.
Okay. So let's start with, what I discovered writing this book. To answer that question, a lot of books are based on one fundamental question: why are we still here? And so I really wanted to find out what caused the shootout, what were the conditions, what led to it, and then what happened as a result of it. And what I found in writing the book was that in the summer of 1968, there was, this is a time when there were a lot of urban uprisings. We had Huff in 1966 and Detroit in 67, and here we were in 68. And what happened was across the country, a great counter-revolution arose of people, especially white people, who felt threatened by the violence that they were seeing in urban areas and the uprisings. And those people congealed around a candidate named Richard Nixon. And Nixon would, 2 weeks after this shootout in Cleveland, would go to Miami, and he would say in his speech where he got the nomination to become the Republican candidate for president of the United States, he said, "I'm the law and order candidate. I alone can solve this problem." Now, if that sounds like it's echoing something, it is, because in 2016, when Donald Trump came here to Cleveland, he said, "I'm the law and order candidate. I alone can solve this problem." So here we are, with this 50 years later, and we have a candidate coming forward. So I said, well, what's the link between Nixon and Trump, and the Trump revolt is what I call it. And the link is this, that his people look back at Nixon's speech in 68 as a model for what he gave in 2016 here in Cleveland. And they were doing that because they were appealing to white supremacy. They were appealing to all the bigots, just as Nixon was doing. So Nixon starts this counter-revolution in 1968. And what he does is he kills the war on poverty, and he kills Lyndon Johnson's attempt to try to remedy situations through programs and assistance that, was really important to try to defeat poverty. And Nixon kills it. He actually gets rid of the Office of Economic Opportunity, and he deliberately kills it. And, so that destruction of that effort that was so necessary back then went away, and instead it was replaced with this repression and the mass incarceration, especially of African-American males over a period of time. And so we went into this kind of repressive state. That Nixon counter-revolution ebbed and flowed over time. We had Bill Clinton come in, we had Jimmy Carter, we had Barack Obama, but it kept coming back. It kept resurfacing, and it resurfaced with enormous power with Donald Trump. And we're seeing it again in this election. Just as I have written in somewhere, the white supremacists no longer hide under hoods. They come out straight in the open and challenge people to come after them.
Yeah, ironically, the results of the, I think it was the Nixon and Kennedy election was percentage points.
Yes.
Even though all that stuff was going on, it was at that time they said it was the closest election in American history.
Yep.
And if you go look at the results and the point spread, it was similar to what they're predicting now.
Yeah, exactly. So I end up doing this book and publishing it. And then a couple of years later, the publisher of this book, the Chicago Review Press, sent me an email out of the blue because I had published with them 2 books. And they said, could you read this book about President Kennedy and his assassination? Because we want you to blurb the book. And so I started reading this book. It was by a Secret Service agent of Jackie Kennedy, who was in Dallas and there at the assassination. I read it. I got to the end, and I thought, oh, my goodness, this is going to turn the world upside down with respect to the assassination.
Paul Landis, right?
Yeah. And Paul Landis, who lives in Shaker Heights. He's 89 years old. And so I read that, and I thought, I've got to work on helping this guy because I knew his age. He's still very much with it, totally with it, an amazing guy. But I knew he was going to be attacked because, he said he found the magic bullet in the back of the limousine, and he's the one that brought it into the hospital. So it changes in a big way the Warren Commission's determination about who killed JFK.
Yeah. Do you think? I mean, as I've discovered that there was a conspiracy on the Warren Commission, right? It's this whole ideal about the conspiracy on his death seemed to be smaller than the conspiracy on the Warren Commission itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, the way to say it is that the Warren Commission was put together by Lyndon Johnson to very quickly close the book. And people don't remember. We were in a period of time, this is 1963, that was just exactly 1 year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we were very close to nuclear war. And Johnson very much wanted to end the dispute because he didn't want this spilling over into people accusing Russia of having something to do with it or Cuba having something to do with it, because that could lead to a nuclear war. And as Johnson said to Earl Warren, the Chief Justice, when he asked him to chair the commission, he said this could lead to 40 million people dying. So we got to get in there. We got to investigate it, but we got to get it done fast. And frankly, they had to blame it on one guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone gunman, to end the controversy. And when they did that, they created nothing but controversy for generations because people said that makes no sense.
Do you think it was do you think it was a way to hide? I'm just asking you to speculate. Do you think it was a way to hide the progress movement that they were trying to make for blacks? Do you see that as this conspiracy to close the door on this and shut it down is another form of way?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that because I think that, you have Lyndon Johnson in office and he begins to carry forward the agenda from JFK, Civil Rights Act of 1964. Tremendous effort to get that passed and, ruined him in the South, frankly. And then the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So he very much carried forward the civil rights agenda of JFK. But with the Warren Commission and with the people doing the investigation, those people, I think, wanted to stop what was going on with JFK. He was asking for peace with the Russians, and he was asking for civil rights for African Americans. And those people definitely, not the Warren Commission, but who was ever behind the assassination, if it was more than Lee Harvey Oswald, clearly had an agenda to stop him, and not only stop him, but stop his brother, who they also saw as coming right after him. So while that all happens, I don't think Johnson would have been involved in that kind of a conspiracy, nor Earl Warren. But it doesn't mean that there wasn't a conspiracy, and we just don't know. But what we do know is that they rushed to a conclusion. They came up with this idea that one bullet went through John F. Kennedy and then went through Governor Conley in front of him. One bullet, breaking bones, including the biggest bone in Conley's wrist, called the radius bone, and he's like 6'4", and it's pristine. Anybody else, any test they did would crush that bullet.
Right.
There's no way that happened. So people were from that get-go like, this can't be true. And now with Paul Landis coming forward, he's like, no, because I found that bullet on the back of the seat of the limousine. I'm the one who brought it.
Well, I think that even the people that are not aware of all of the details of the history are now doing a widespread doubt of this. I think for me, as I look at this again, I ask myself, like, again, I'll go back to your original question. Why are we still here, right? Yeah. Why are we able to have a discussion about the murder of a former president, and why is that still causing havoc inside the civil rights? Why is that still a problem? Was the civil rights slowed down by that incident, or was it sidelined by it? Yeah,
well, here's the long answer is that in the short run, it allowed Johnson to apply political pressure to get things done. Okay, so 64 Civil Rights Act, ending segregation in public facilities, 65 Voting Rights Act, giving people the right to vote, and that's all great. But look closely at that history. If you look at it, Johnson signs that bill in 65 after Selma. So it's the summer of 65. He signs it. 2 weeks later is Watts in L.A. What's going on? We're moving in progress, but the problem is the progress is too slow. It's too too little, too late at that point. You had all these great migrations from the South to northern cities, including here in Cleveland. And all the African Americans and blacks that came to those cities were closely bunched into neighborhoods that became overcrowded, like Huff and Glenville and in various other areas. And then those areas, because of the overcrowding, became, troubled in a lot of ways. So that gave rise to all of this urban violence that happened. LBJ was trying to solve the problem, but it was already, the problem had already been baked in, if you will. And so when all of that violence happens, as I said, that brings up a massive counter-revolution of we need to stop this and we need a law and order president. And that's what really stops progress in the civil rights movement.
And that's an interpretation, right? I recently was online going back and forth with this young man who didn't quite understand what the discussion should be about when you say law and order.
Yeah.
To us, it means something different for the African Americans and for even some Hispanics. When you say law and order, that means something different from the white people, right? They see it different. He was speaking more like he was white.
Right.
So it's becoming pervasive in America. And I think it's because there's not enough people like you out there giving the context to these things. And so to that point, when you start talking about Kennedy and this new research and book you're writing, how the events, the things that he was involved in before this assassination could have affected these on a positive way.
So I ended up looking at his presidency, and I saw that in June of 1963, 5 months before the assassination, he was on his mountaintop. He had an extraordinary month that changed his presidency and showed the way forward. Very much like, it really reminded me of Martin Luther King's speech the night before he was assassinated, his mountaintop speech. I've been to the mountain. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we're going to get there. Okay. Kennedy had it's a very similar thing. He's on his mountaintop. He sees the promised land and what it means and what it should be, but he's not going to get there. And, he's going to be assassinated just as Martin Luther King was. So what was his mountaintop? June of 1963, he gives a peace speech at American University on June 10. It's a commencement address, but he uses it to say, let's stop fighting needlessly and recklessly with the Russians. Let's try to get rid of all of these nuclear weapons that threaten all of us. It was astounding that he would say such a thing. That, defense groups were like, you're appeasing the Russians. What are you doing? But it was his peace speech. It's a beautiful speech, really well done. And the next day, George Wallace stands in the way of two students trying to enter the University of Alabama. And Kennedy uses that occasion to give a national TV address where he says, look, we got to look at our consciences, and we've got to treat people with equality, and we need legislation to stop this sort of thing, anti-segregation. This had just come after Birmingham, where Martin Luther King went to Birmingham to desegregate, the most segregated city in America is what he called it. And he went there, and, that caused the Kennedy administration to stand up. And he did. And this was very different because he had been very kind of lukewarm about civil rights until then. This was a big change. And if you look at what he did in that month, he was meeting with lawyers, with churchmen, with all sorts of business leaders, and having them all come to the White House saying, we got to change this. We're at a breaking point right now. And so he then introduces legislation which will become the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But it won't pass until he dies. It stalls. But in his nuclear test ban treaty does come to fruition. It eventually will lead to more anti-nuclear proliferation treaties, the fall of the Berlin Wall, etc., the fall of the communist regime. And so it's interesting that he goes to Berlin in that same month and gives his speech, his defiant speech, essentially tear down this wall is what Ronald Reagan says, but he says it first with Ich bin ein Berliner, and then he goes home to Ireland, and it's very moving. I mean, if you read his speeches, you weep. Just the poetry and the power of him going back to his homeland and saying, you freed yourself, you, the Irish, from the English, and you're a model, to the world. So it's an extraordinary story.
Do you think that JFK went into the office with this liberation thought about civil rights? Do you think it developed over a period of time?
It's an excellent question, because no, he didn't. And the reason he didn't is the history is this. The South was known as the solid, democratically solid South from the time of, FDR through Lyndon Baines Johnson. And it was known that because the Democrats in the South were in charge because of Jim Crow. And so all the presidents who were trying to win an election to win the South had to be lukewarm on civil rights. They were going to lose it. And so he walked into office with that same thing, with that same dilemma. And this change on June 11th, 1963, when he gives that speech, is a huge change where he's finally saying, this is not just a legal issue where we have, we go to the courts and we get an injunction, to get our schools integrated and things like that. This is a moral issue. He says it's as old as the scriptures and as important as the American Constitution.
Yeah, I think I'm still looking for the thing that sparked his change, because that's a drastic change, right?
Yeah.
That's a drastic change, because he did not only just change it, he stayed there.
Yeah.
It's not like we went there and he was just a speech, but he actually stayed and kept his speech.
I'll tell you what did it. First of all, Birmingham. The images of Birmingham with the dogs biting children and the fire hoses. They literally fire hosed a little girl down the street with the power of these things. He looked at that in the New York Times and he was appalled by it. So was the nation. But it was, King made this really controversial call of getting children to march in Birmingham, by almost the thousands, and them getting arrested and putting them in pens at the county fair, arrested and so forth. That's why he came to Cleveland, by the way, to raise bail money to get those kids out of there. But so he sees that. That's the beginning of the change. And I'll tell you what really changes it. The night he gives the speech, June 11th, he goes on national television at 8 o'clock. A guy in Mississippi goes home a couple hours later named Medgar Evers. And in his front yard, he is shot down by an assassin in a bush while his kids and his wife are inside the house and come out and watch him bleed to death. And Medgar Evers was not just a nobody. I mean, he was already pretty well known, but you got to remember, this guy was a veteran. He a couple days after D-Day, he was with the group that went in post D-Day. He was a heroic guy. And he's in Mississippi running the NAACP down there and the demonstrations that were like the Birmingham demonstration. But he was shot down. He was 37 years old. And I think what Kennedy saw was, if we don't do something about this kind of violence is now going to spread not only from the South, but into the North. So that's what really pushes him, is this just being horrified by what they're seeing. And now you can see it on television, for the first time. So it's important.
Well, I think...
Let me add one other point.
Go ahead.
When Malcolm X comes to speak here at Corey Methodist Church in 1964, this is after Kennedy's death, but when he comes to speak at Corey Methodist Church, there's a guy named Lewis Robinson who's out in the foyer of that church, who's handing out pamphlets for people to come to his house to join the Medgar Evers Rifle Club here in Cleveland. And all of these rifle clubs around the country are named Medgar Evers Rifle Clubs. And that's why they are surveilled by the FBI with informants and everything else. I mean, it's an incredible story and an incredible link to Cleveland.
Yeah, I think I'm blown away by the information you're bringing up about these tie-ins of because these are things that people weren't quite aware of what sparked, JFK to come to these things. And you brought up another interesting point when you talked about that he saw something on TV. And when I look at today TV, it is not as revealing as it was back then. So in other words, you would see, dogs biting people back then. They show that. Now it's almost, they don't get to see how bad the racism is, even though we got all this media around. Yeah. Do you think that the politicians, I'm just going to have you do some hypothetical here. Do you think the politicians of today are not as horrified because of those visuals? They don't know about them, or they just ignoring them, or what? What do you think?
Well, the visuals have gone from TV to social media, frankly. The killings in 2016 of, and I'm going to blank on all of the names, but they were captured by people on Facebook or on, mainly on Facebook, but they were videos that people had from their cameras. George Floyd, they captured it on people's telephones. So it's no longer TV oriented. It's now social media oriented. So people still see it and become enraged by it, but it's not. See, back then, TV, there were 3 networks. So people were united in what they were seeing. Today, a lot of people will see those murders, and a lot of people won't.
It was desensitized. I think we kind of desensitized.
And there is a desensitization of it all too. Yeah.
And there's some people that some simulation is in our culture that we should just do it, can't get along. I was also struck by that during George Wallace's time with the governor, right?
Yep.
That he had between 10 and 11% of the vote from blacks.
Yeah.
Right. Which was really odd for me because there was no mystery of what was going on with him, and I think that's what we're seeing now. So I'm thinking that maybe that's all called. I'm just trying to find an answer to that. Why are we at where we at now?
Yeah, I can tell you, it is bewildering to me that any African American would vote for Trump. I mean, the guy is talking about rounding up people and putting them in concentration camps, and he's a complete white supremacist. He, in New York, he was sued for not allowing people to enter his apartments and those sorts of things. And, Charlottesville, they're good people on both sides. I mean, are you kidding me? There's something wrong with people who see him and don't see that. I am bewildered by it. I am totally bewildered by it. And, Barack Obama recently chastised black men to say, you're this way because you just don't want to vote for a woman. And that's pretty strong stuff.
Well, I think that a lot of us are starting to get the realization that it ain't just a woman.
Yeah.
I think that, and I guess again, I'm really trying to get to the bottom of where we're at now, is we vote, we support, let's just take a vote. Let's act like we never voted, right? We support everything that's against our progress. It's weird. It's like we want to stay in the same place. I think Matarif and I were talking about every time you get to a progress point, there's always something to knock you down. Well, I found that those knock you downs are not always other people, it's us.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's continuing. Do you think that people like Trump and people that were not voting on the same lines as JFK, do you think that they have been able to sway black people to believe they can become the house group? They could become the favored. Do you think that they've been able to bring them in somehow? No,
they will do the most dastardly things. This is really a dangerous time, and this is a dangerous guy, and their agenda is very dangerous. I mean, they're literally talking about rounding up 20 million immigrants and putting them in camps. Our economy will screech to a halt without having people to work the positions these people are working. But let me tell you what I think is the answer to this. And I get this from talking with Imam Shahid. I think that the reason that there's this disconnect is I think there are a lot of African-American males in particular who feel disaffected and not heard. And they can vote for all the Democrats they want, and it's not going to make any difference in their life. They've seen it time after time after time. Nothing is changing. So a change agent like Trump would be attracted to them, even though if they really thought about it, they would say, this guy ain't our guy. So I think that, that cynicism and that feeling of despair that, why should I vote? It doesn't make any difference, to maybe this guy's a change agent who'll do something different, because even voting for Democrats, I don't see the change.
What's ironic about that? Now, I would buy that, right? except for most of those people don't even know who their senators are. And we understand that the senators are the ones in there doing all the purse strings.
We could draw a circumference around where we're sitting right now.
Yeah.
And I'll bet you about 5% of the people in this area vote.
Right.
It's extremely low.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, all the struggle to get the vote. Yeah. And you got so few people doing it, and it's because year after year after year they're beaten down. And they just don't believe in it. Yeah. And so that's got to change. I mean, that feeling has got to change.
Yeah. I think there's so much stuff we could do. And again, as if voting wasn't our only measure, right? They're not active in their communities. They're not. If you go out to the communities, some of the communities I've been blessed enough to live in, where it's predominantly white, they're very active with their kids' schools. They're very active in their programs around. And it seems like we're always doing things that are counterintuitive to our interests. And it's really baffling me, which is why this program, and I'm really driving into this program. And so when you talk about JFK, and when you talk about people that are transformative as JFK, do you think that there's anything that he can say, or just say Biden or anybody can say, that'll force the minorities in this country to recognize the history and to do something about it?
Yeah, I mean, what he said back at the time was, you got to step up and you got to keep fighting, and you can't grow cynical and grow disinterested. Progress is slow, but it happens. We are in a different place now than we were in 1963 in so many ways. I mean, I say, why are we still here about a lot of stuff, but we are in a different place in so many ways. So I think that what JFK would say, and it's interesting because his brother Bobby met with James Baldwin in June of '63, by the way, in New York City to try and talk about what should we do. Harry Belafonte was there. It's just an amazing behind-the-scenes meeting. And what Bobby Kennedy said to them is, hey, the Irish came to America 80 years ago, and nobody hired us. And there was great discrimination against us. And we just persevered. And they got up and said, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You're way off base on that. But the struggle is the answer. And the struggle, has to be not just to vote and get people in office, but to improve our schools, to improve neighborhoods, to improve housing, all that stuff that was going on with the war on poverty, for example, in the late 60s. That's what we need to start turning things around, because you need people to be invested in their schools and learning this history to really understand how important all this stuff is.
Go ahead, Brother Shaheed. What you got to add?
Jim and I have a long relationship going back and forth about some of the solutions and how we see going forward. And as I've spoken with you, I told you before that all of these things are like planned. I mean, nothing's haphazard. It's all planned. And everybody in the system works together. Not the system we're surrounded by and ambushed by. All those people work together to maintain the status quo. So the kind of things that need to be done in terms of education, you already see where this guy down in Florida has got an agenda where the school books that would help do that are banned. And that's other states where the governors of other states will go along with that. The businesses, the schools, give you a good insight. City of Cleveland is predominantly black population. 70% of the people who work for the city of Cleveland are white. Okay, how did that happen? Okay, it's the way it goes. The police department, for instance. The police department is a culture, okay? Around the country, there are certain basic, rudimentary kind of hidden agendas that they don't talk about that all the policemen understand, especially the white racist ones. They understand. And if you're a good cop, you can't outdo the racists. You can't outdo it. So you're actually surrounded and ambushed every step of the way that you try to make a move. You can't do it.
But to Jim's point, we agree that something has to be done, right? So
we've been trying to do it ever since Tulsa. And like I said before, Tulsa was actually the answer. Okay, Rosewood was the answer. Lake Lanier, where they flooded this black community, killed the people and flooded it, the biggest man-made lake, I think, in the country. We have always been attempting to break the cycle of slavery. Okay, then you get to the people you're saying are going to vote for Trump and so on and so forth. There's always been people like that. If you were to read some of the interviews from some of the former slaves that lived into the early 1900s, their comments about slavery was like it really wasn't that bad. You know, Mr. So-and-so made sure we had this and we had that. You know, I mean, so...
Malcolm X called them the house slaves in the fields.
Yeah, I mean, so consequently, if you're comfortable, and that's the same way it is now, do you actually believe that Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and all the rest of these guys that have come, they have become celebrities, they're going to sacrifice all of that for what? To go tell black people to do this, doing that? They are household names. They have come from poverty. All they wanted to do was to get in the position that the white people were in. That's all they wanted to do. All of that rebellion talk. They asked Ice Cube one time, said, man, you're not as fiery anymore. You don't say. He said, well, I got money. I didn't have no money then. I mean, he's telling the truth. That's all of them were like just lower to middle class guys that wanted to make it in the society. They're not going to jeopardize anything. And that was one of the things that I just wrote about in terms of the people like you got all these celebrities becoming Muslim. Okay. And then you have Dr. Omar Johnson, who was a Muslim and he left out of the religion. The reason he left out of the religion was because of the people who came and talked to him, because he was a black activist. And they came to him telling him he needed to wear sandals in the wintertime and leather socks and all these long garments and all of this perfume and these turbans and stuff on their head. Okay. They have absolutely no power and they're not working toward any of that. You find no active communities, Muslim communities here in this country. Very few.
Okay. Do we need another JFK? Do you think that the white community would benefit for us if we had another JFK?
I can answer that, but I want to hear your answer.
Okay, well, JFK, like Jim made it real clear earlier, that we're in a different time. You know, the same shoes that we wore when we were 10 years old don't fit no more. Okay? So any kind of JFK that comes along, the groundwork is being set to make sure that somebody like that doesn't come along and that the 60s don't come along anymore. The groundwork is being set for that. Okay? You can almost go to any police department, any sheriff's department, even in the army. All those people are right wing. All those people agree with Trump because what happens is it empowers them to be able to run people's lives, to brutalize them. You talk about it when they talk about all of the deaths that are taking place over in the Middle East. That's not news. That's a progress report. They're saying, oh, today we killed 7,000 people. Oh, yesterday we got altogether we've killed about 50,000 people. You know, it's like nobody is concerned about the lives of women, children. You understand, schools, they blow up hospitals and all that. And where's the outrage? There is no outrage, man. So when you start talking about a person who cares nothing about human life and everything they've gotten in their entire existence has come from not caring about human life, why would they change? So finding another JFK, that might be possible. I was doing an interview and they asked me same question. What do you see as the solution to the present problems? And I told them that the solution that I see, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, is that a half a dozen asteroids the size of Houston, the size of Texas, take it all away. The world is run by evil people. The good people don't stand a chance.
Listen, Evie. Here's what's going to happen. Trump's going to win. I'm going to have to go to jail. Ivan's going to have to go to jail, and we're going to be in different cells. We're going to be in the same cell, and I'm going to have to listen to this for the next 15 years. But let me seriously answer your question. And again, we have these great debates, and he helped me so much by listening to what he's saying and understanding his point, and I say back to him this, I said, does politics matter? Joe Biden won, and we have a black woman on the Supreme Court. Is she going to be important if Kamala Harris wins and changes the court? Yes, that is extremely important, and that is really powerful. That woman is one of 9, and Biden did it. That's politics. The other thing is you want to elect state legislatures that will support open education and not ban books. Right now, we've got a right-wing, totally Republican legislature that's gerrymandered in Ohio. And, you can't progress at that point. You got to change those people so they can give money and direct money to schools to teach our history with all of its honesty and not ban books. So politics is really important. Voting is really important. But that said, he's really made me understand why there is despair about voting. I think people should not give in to despair, but I'm talking as a white person, not as an African American in America.
Yeah, that actually is a good point. It's a good point because the one thing that, again, for me, it helped my mind open up to
yes.
what the actual truth is, right? It's funny, we got to qualify truth now, right? That may be the truth, but that's the actual truth, right? The real truth is, he's right. There's still a struggle, and there's still a lot of despair, and there's still a lot of people that don't believe in the system. But I think for me, and it seems like for you, that I have to find some glimmer of hope in there somewhere because I got to leave some children here. Yeah, I got to leave some grandchildren here. Yeah. So, but and I don't.
By the way, he's got great children and grandchildren.
Yes,
who are extremely.
Yes, I've met them.
I mean, they are they're wonderful citizens. And they're contributing.
Yeah. And how do they perform? And they perform that way because they are not. The truth is not hidden from them.
Yeah.
They know the truth, they recognize it, and they develop their own minds, right? They go, okay, grandpa or dad, but here's how I see it, and they go through the world. And so just because you hear despair or something like doesn't mean you're going to turn into a bad person, which is what I say to a lot of people that agree with Trump. Yeah. I said, just because Trump says it's a bad day, don't mean you have to go through life treating people bad and doing bad things. There's still some things you have to hope for. So along those lines, as I was doing more study about JFK, I said that same thing. It's funny, that question keeps coming up. Why are we still here? We're still here because, we just brought it up, despair, right? And then I also think there's a lack of understanding once people hear people like Matawa's point, they turn it into something else. Yeah. They think it's unpatriotic. Yeah. Well, that's not how we solve problems. We solve problems by saying, hey, maybe he's got a great point. JFK saw it and he said, oh, wow, he reacted. Yeah. He probably had a whole bunch of people tell him, you're overreacting. And so when I ask you this question about, do you think there's somebody that's transformative? Do you think, given the way the politics are now and all the vitriol you're going to take if you think opposite, do you think someone can break through that and still do the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be hopeful about things. And our history is one of being hopeful about things. We do go through really bad times. This is a really particularly dangerous time. I don't know how it's going to turn out, so it worries me a lot more than anything else I've ever seen. But I think you have to be hopeful. And what you see about times like this is, if you read enough history, that societies and cultures go through periods of time where they're infected by a virus. And we're infected by a virus right now. But the virus eventually, hopefully, burns out. And once you get to the other side of it, it burns out, and I'm hoping that's going to happen. I thought that was going to happen in 2020 when Trump lost. But, these people were just gutless and spineless and let him right back in.
Well, I think so. Let's talk about that. So during JFK's transformation, I guess there were there people that were just as loud as he was, fighting against what he wanted to do?
For sure. I mean, the people in the South, for example, when he put his civil rights legislation to Congress a senator from Georgia named Russell, Dick Russell, very close friends with LBJ because he had been in the Senate. Russell came out and said, man, if we pass this and allow desegregation, this is going to lead to communism. So that was like, that's the worst thing you could say at that point in time. So there was this huge group of people who opposed it for their own reasons. By the way, Russell ends up being one of the commissioners on the Warren Commission. But that's another story. There were a lot of people who opposed him violently. He talked to a whole group of religious people who he brought into the East Room, 200 from all faiths. And one of the guys from the American Baptist Association said essentially segregation now, segregation today, segregation forever. It's God's plan. Look at the Jews they were slaves in Israel, and we've had segregation in this country, and we're a great country. I mean, it's just these people were violently against what he was trying to do, but he had a moment where he thought he could change enough people's minds that we could actually make some progress. We really needed federal legislation that says you don't have black and white drinking fountains. People can eat at the same, lunch counter. People can go to the same hotels. That's a big challenge and risk.
Well, it's almost as if I believe the universe makes it even eventually. I don't know what the eventually is, what that point is, but I believe that somehow it turns up. I find that, and so I'm just actually a question, whether it's religion or somebody's economic position, they use those things as a way to lean on of why they shouldn't do X. Right? He said, my religion says I shouldn't do that, so I can't do that. Or if we do that, the immigrants are going to take over. Yeah. Right? That's what I hear. And it sounds like it was the same thing back then, that they're doing the exact same thing now.
Yeah.
But still, this young Catholic politician who was, by all means, set in place for politics by his father, Joe, he was able to say, I'm going to break through all of that. And I think he kind of knew he was going to risk his life. Do you think that he knew that he was going to?
Very much. Very much. He knew it was dangerous. In fact, he had all sorts of premonitions about his own death. And the thing that you learn from reading enough American history is that the way for some politicians to prevail is to divide us. And the way to do that is through what's called culture wars. Okay? So the culture wars in the 60s were the blacks are dangerous. The culture wars today are, transgender people in the bathroom. I mean, really, the advertisements I see on TV, I go to people who like Trump and I say, when was the last time you saw a transgender person in your bathroom?
Well, I think it's so funny because when
you don't have to agree with it, but I mean,
is
it really affecting your life? It is not affecting your life.
Right.
So, live and let live. But
when Mataf brought it up, he brought it up in one of our interviews, and he phrased it so well. I'm trying to go through the audio to capture that moment where he said, it doesn't matter whether you put on a dress or whatever.
Yeah.
It's still the same oppressive society, whether, for everybody.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's not like he jumped out, even as a religious scholar, he didn't jump out at that and point at that.
Yeah.
But yet so many people are doing that. And what that does
for example, he's not really in favor of gay rights or transgender rights, but he's in favor of live and let live.
Yes.
And that's a big difference.
That's a big difference.
It's a huge difference. You can have your own thoughts and opinions.
That's
you should have your own thoughts and opinions about stuff.
Because we all have to answer to. We have to answer to.
Yeah.
And I think that's hard for somebody to do. Yeah. What he's done is selflessness, right? It's not about me. It's about overall community.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one thing that I want him to watch, which he won't. Will Ferrell went across the country and did a documentary with a guy who helped write Saturday Night Live, a lot of his skits. And this guy became transgender when he was 60 years old. The answer is he was always, feeling that way. Yeah. But he had 2 kids, and he switched. And Will Ferrell reached out to him and said, let's take a trip across the country together. And they rode across, and what you realize is the pain this guy suffered, because he felt this way. He wasn't doing this because he felt like it, because it was fun or anything else. This was really true existential pain that he had, in trying to be who he thought he was. And what's really interesting, if you watch the documentary, it's out just now, is they go to Oklahoma and they go to a cowboy bar. And so here's this transgender guy walking in, but he's walking in with Will Ferrell. Okay. So everybody's nice to him face to face, but then they show Twitter, and it's disgusting how awful people are on Twitter when they're anonymous. People face to face are kind to each other. People on social media are monsters.
The media, that right there is that's why we're where we are now.
Yes.
Because now there's more places to hide.
Yes.
And that actually is one of the thing that keeps coming up. When you can hide, because an individual reached out on, I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to pick on me, and I got an undergrad in sociology, to start talking about the power that a vice president has, which is really foolish, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can go all the way back to Jane Quayle. Nobody had power. That's just a figurehead. Right. And I noticed they kept going back to one theme. Well, she ain't done nothing but run her mouth. That's a theme usually given to a black woman.
Yeah.
Right? It's really, it almost offended me, but I couldn't go there because it was supposed to be a political argument.
Well, Hillary Clinton was the screechy, nasty woman.
Right.
I mean, that is also, it's, you think about it, African-American males got the right to vote long before women had the right to vote. All women. So that's telling.
We're here because social media is another place for the bigot to hide. They can hide there up under some weird screen name, and then when you finally catch them, the jobs now are getting wise enough, said we won't be part of that. They can say that wasn't me. I just saw somebody say I was hacked. That never was me. Yeah. Foolishness, right? Yeah. And like you said, face to face, I have never in all my entire life never been called out of my name.
Yeah.
Ever.
People face to face are humans, On social media, they're monsters.
And that's what's driving everything.
It's way too easy. The Plain Dealer used to let people anonymously comment on columns, and I wrote for them occasionally. And anonymous, it was ridiculous. These people would just say stupid things, mean things. But if you make somebody stand up and say it's me and I'm saying this, or better yet, get them in a room with somebody face to face.
I tell you, it'd be really nice I'm proposing that both of you write in the same exact book about the same exact point. It would be very interesting to read, and it would be something that a lot of us could look at and say, that's why the perspective's different.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Because he's strong, but he offers experience, right? So if you say to him, why you say that, he's not going because of some things that don't make any sense. He can go to points after point, right?
Yeah, right.
And you say, I don't totally agree with you, but I see why you get there. And same with you. Yeah. And I think when you write these books about Ballots and Bullets, this is not from your world. This doesn't benefit you at all. In fact, I'm sure somebody give you a private message and want to know why you write books like Ballots and Bullets, right?
The police hate
it. Yeah, the police wouldn't meet with me. And I was pretty fair with them, too.
Yeah, he was. It's the most balanced book written about that time that I've ever seen.
Right.
And it's more factual than anything that I've ever seen that was written about that time and that place. But the whole thing is not built on fairness. It's about based on what your point of view that needs to be expressed. It's not about fairness. It's not about any of that. It's not about laws changed by those who benefit. Okay, so if they're not going to benefit by equality, if they're not going to benefit by you becoming equal and all that, why would they make a law in your favor? It doesn't make sense. I understand that, that's the whole point Jim and I always talked about. He has a lot of hope that somewhere something is going to change. And that may happen. I mean, really, I would wish that it would, but I just can't see it. I mean, if a person can't see it, you can't see it.
This is the problem. Using stone cold logic. I mean, how do you fight that?
Right. And we're going to continue to search this subject, Ballots and Bullets, and this new. Let's talk about some of the writings and places you posted. I want people to go on that link to some of the things.
There's a link that you can go to called Muck Rack, two different words, MUCK and then space RACK. muckrack, and my name, Robenalt, Robenalt. And I don't even know who they are, but they've collected all of my articles.
Yeah.
And there are like 187 of them that I've written, in the Washington Post and all these various things. I write a lot of political stuff, but I have written a lot of stuff about race in America too.
Yeah, re-emphasize that point because I think you were addressing it to him, but it actually helped me understand the argument. When you said voting has basically teaching that voting has consequences, that Joe Biden election brought in
Ketanji Jackson Brown.
Yeah, which is really important.
Really
right?
important.
Because
Really
Supreme Court.
And she's young, and she'll be on it for a long time.
Law of the land.
Yeah.
As long as she stay out of scandal.
So it doesn't matter. Clarence Thomas is knee-deep in scandal, and nobody cares.
Because they control the narrative of the people. Donald Trump understood that he was dealing with a bunch of ignoramus bigots. He understood that. He tapped into that gold minefield that he knew that anything that he said, it wouldn't make any difference. Whatever he said, it doesn't make any difference because they have this thing embedded in their whole personality. Get the news. That's all they care about. They don't care if he lies. They don't care if he cheats, he steals, he rapes. It doesn't matter because they feel that if he gets in there, then they'll be able to do the same thing, without anybody questioning him. He's talking about going in there and all those people who are indicted and convicted and sentenced in January the 6th thing. He's getting ready. He's going to let all of them out. He's going to do all the kind of things that appeal to the base nature of the kind of people, his constituents.
And what's frightening is how many of them.
There are many of
millions
them.
And millions.
So you don't think that I used to tell Jim all the time, I said, Jim, if I had your money, I wouldn't mind moving next to you because you're a good guy. I said, but the reason that I wouldn't do that, not only just the money, but because your neighbor is a Nazi. So I couldn't move next to you because it'd be a problem.
Well, Robenalt, I thank you as a member of the black community for continuing to pick a fight, right? So JFK did. He picked a fight.
Yep.
It cost him his life.
Yep.
And it almost cost him his legacy if it was not for people like you who were writing books to keep his legacy alive.
Yeah.
In one point, in some of the background, they were talking about how sickly he was.
Yeah.
They can't even believe he turned out to be he had back problems.
Yeah.
He had scarlet fever as a lot. And they were really surprised he turned out to be this great politician because people counted him out.
Yeah.
And thank goodness that he turned out to be transformative. And now all the other presidents are trying to emulate him.
He was a fighter. When he went to Ireland, he met with the Irish Parliament. And he talked about how all 8 of his grandparents, all 8 of them, left Ireland within months of each other in the 1840s because of the famine. And they came to the United States as just menial workers, and 3 generations later, their descendant was the president of the United States. So,
well, Jim, this book that you had coming out, this new book, so kind of give us a little background. When is it going to be?
Where's the process I finished the book proposal, and I give it to my agent, and then she'll shop it and find a publisher. Hopefully there'll be a publisher. I think there will be.
Right.
But it usually takes about a year.
Okay. And the theme of the book?
The theme of the book is that JFK was on his mountaintop, and he had a vision of the future. And we need to go back to that vision. We need to not just remember his assassination, but to go back before that time. What was his vision? Peace, civil rights, equality, international justice. Those were the things he was pointing to, and we've got to remember that's what he stood for.
Again, this is E.B. Smith and Facts Matter. We're going to dive into a lot more of this because these themes about human rights are coming up more and more. So we're going to kind of get some people on here. We're going to talk about actually international human rights because it really is a human rights issue. Thank you for continue to write, continue to research, and thank you for your information. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you. I like the being the same cell together. I'd have to listen. I wasn't going to say it. And I have to listen to this shit for the next 15 years.
Hey, Jim told somebody one time, he was talking about, now what is he talking about? Jim said, for real, some of the stuff, I don't even know what he's talking about.